Question number 12, Iain Lees-Galloway.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Workplace Relations and Safety and asks, does he accept that exploitation of migrant workers is pervasive in New Zealand? If not, why not?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Michael Woodhouse.
Mr Speaker, migrant exploitation in any form and in any quantity is a great concern, but I don't consider it to be pervasive. The vast majority of employers in New Zealand are law-abiding and treat their employees fairly, and the Labour Inspectorate are working very hard to stamp out those employers whose practices do not meet minimum employment standards.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question, Iain Lees-Galloway.
Why does he think migrant workers continue to report high levels of abuse, intimidation, underpayment, debt bondage and a host of other exploitative employment practices despite his so-called efforts to stamp out migrant exploitation?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Michael Woodhouse.
Well, that's a question best put to the complainants, but I would imagine that it is because they have a great deal of confidence that they will be listened to, taken seriously, and their issues will be prosecuted. Yeah. And indeed, that's exactly what's happening with the extra resources we have given to the Labour Inspectorate.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question, Iain Lees-Galloway.
Well, why does he think that migrant workers are reporting these issues to a researcher rather than taking them to the appropriate authorities?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Michael Woodhouse.
Mr Speaker, I presume the member is referring to the document entitled Worker Exploitation in New Zealand, A Troubling Landscape, prepared and published by the University of Auckland. What's important to consider about that report is that while it draws conclusions that migrant exploitation is pervasive and widespread, and indeed it is a very thorough empirical study, the method of gaining those stories was to go and ask people who have said they have been exploited. 105 people did so and told their stories. That is concerning. But given the tens of thousands of overseas workers, maybe more than that, during the period of those told stories, I don't believe that that constitutes pervasive or widespread exploitation.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question, Iain Lees-Galloway.
Is he concerned that it's the same industries, dairy farming, fishing, hospitality, horticulture, construction and international education, that keep coming up as the most exploitative? And if so, why isn't he doing more to end the exploitation epidemic in those sectors?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Michael Woodhouse.
Well, Mr Speaker, as I said in the answer to the primary question, I am concerned about any migrant exploitation wherever it occurs and in whatever volume. But if that member truly expects to come to this House and cry crocodile tears over migrant exploitation when his party is not prepared to support the very legislation that this government passed, like the Immigration Amendment Bill, which significantly increased the penalties in 2015, like the Mass Arrivals Bill that we passed in 2013, then there's a word for that sort of thing, and I'm not allowed to use it.
Supplementary question.
Order. Order. Supplementary question, Iain Lees-Galloway.
Does he accept that migrant exploitation has a chilling effect on wages and conditions for all workers in those sectors? If not, why not?
Speaker.
The Honourable Michael Woodhouse.
Mr Speaker, there is no evidence that, firstly, the exploitation is widespread or that it would lead to the suppression of wages. Rather than be driven by hyperbole, I need to be driven by the data, and the data say that there has been a 3.1% increase in wages year on year in those industries since this government came to office, and very low interest rates and inflation rates, which suggests that quite the opposite. Wages are growing.
Supplementary question.
Order. Order.
Point of order.
Point of order, Richard Prosser.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. While the Minister is answering from the realms of fantasy, can you arrange for each member to get a unicorn for Christmas?
Supplementary question, Iain Lees-Galloway.
When will he accept that too many employers rely on exploiting migrant workers so that they can avoid paying decent wages and meeting basic employment standards?
The Honourable Michael Woodhouse.
Here's what I will expect, Mr Speaker. I accept that one example of migrant exploitation is one too many, which is why we invested heavily in improving compliance with immigration law with the Labour Inspectorate that has grown by 90% since this government came to office, and that we have passed laws strengthening the sanctions against non-compliant employers, and I encourage that member and his party to support the government in their efforts.
And that